At the local elections last year, amongst the chaos of Tory councils being swept away in a tidal wave of support for Reform UK, Labour were also hammered in their former Heartland council of Durham, losing 38 council seats and reduced down to a paltry 4 as Reform UK were catapulted into overall control with 65 seats. This was a majority Labour council for almost a century, and this is emblematic of the collapse of Labour's key voting blocs in post-industrial Britain, having failed to overturn neoliberalism that destroyed these communities in the first place. Results like this have led to a popular mainstream press narrative of Labour being uniquely at loggerheads with reform over these areas of the country. Yet, precious few column inches have been dedicated to the threat posed by parties to the left of the Labour Party. In a poll of 811 Labour defectors taken in June of this year, electoral calculus found that almost twice as many of them would vote for the Lib Dems or the Greens rather than Reform UK or the Conservatives. And this is before the launch of a new left-wing party founded by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. The expectation is that more progressive parties would be picking up victories against Labour, areas like London, the kind of progressive areas of the country, and then areas such as the North West and Wales, these would be off limits, right? This was a Labour reform battleground. This, however, is proving not to be the case, as last night saw 2 council by-elections in Newcastle and Cardiff, areas that have been Labour strongholds since time immemorial. Both seats were taken from Labour by the Green Party. In South Jesmond and Newcastle upon Tyne, the Greens surged by 15% to narrowly pip the Liberal Democrats to win the suburban ward, one known for its high student population. The Labour's vote share cratered by 25%, the majority of which it seems moved leftwards, as the Reform vote share was even less, on just 11% to Labour's 17%. Just for posterity, I will note the Tories only got 3% here, which I think we can all agree is very, very funny. Given the national vote share, this would have been disappointing, but not surprising for Labour, as there has always been a moderately strong Liberal Democrat presence in the area, competing for the centrist voters. The next result, however, should be far more concerning for the Labour Party. In the Grangetown ward in Cardiff, the Labour vote disintegrated by a mammoth 30%, losing to the Green Party. And it is important to note here, the Greens had run a joint campaign last time round in 2022, when these councils were last contested, with Plaid Cymru, but still managed to win despite the Greens and Plaid running separately this time round. Not only is the progressive vote coming for Labour majorities in every corner of the country, the Labour core vote share is now so low that a progressive party can win against them, even when that vote is split. I mean, is it any wonder why? Labour has been very clear it doesn't want our votes. Remember what Keir Starmer said all those years ago.
The door is open and you can leave.
Oh no, they're shaking off the fleas. It turns out, Labour, you needed those fleas to vote for you, didn't you? If you wanted to not lose seats, and not just in London and Manchester, not just in Bristol, but in places like Cardiff and Newcastle upon Tyne as well, right? If you wanted to keep these seats, or indeed the 6-vote margin in Runcorn and Helsby that happened in May of this year, maybe some of those fleas needed to stay on side. Maybe the box that people wanted to put the hard left into, going trot hunting against people who just had basic anti-austerity policies, maybe that might have had a little bit of a negative externality in terms of losing what should be safe Labour areas, heartland seats that have been Labour over a century in some councils here. And that's where they're losing their core voter base, right? And so all of this desire to think that these people have nowhere else to go, which is essentially was the line by the Labour right for such a long time. The left have nowhere else to go, they have to vote for us, is showing to be completely unfounded, and it is costing Labour dearly in places that they should be winning. Like minus 30% is an absolutely kind of meteoric drop in Labour vote share in that Cardiff ward that we're seeing there. And the fact that the Greens can win on such low as 24% is real warning signs for Labour. Now, let's just go back to that electoral calculus poll I mentioned earlier. It shows exactly what I'm saying here about people leaving Labour to its left. Those polled were asked to list reasons why they would not vote for Labour again, having voted Labour in 2024. Whilst all defectors marked Labour down for being out of touch, so true given what Starmer is like, the second most popular opinion by far was that Labour were not Labour enough, an opinion that ranked as the highest amongst Green and Liberal defectors. It's clear that Labour's approach of fiscal caution and anti-migrant rhetoric is putting off many voters to their left. But the question, of course, is that they're trying to win over reform voters, right? So is it winning over those same reform voters that they're desperate to keep on side? And true to form, the McSweeney Politburo strategy is paying off just as well as you'd expect. This is the latest poll from Reform Friendly Polls to find out now, so please do take it with a pinch of salt. But they have Labour on a quite frankly embarrassing 19%. The lowest Labour have polled since the EU elections of 2019, which were quite an aberration in the long run. Reform are leading with 31%, and the Tories are level with Labour. If replicated at an election, it would give Reform a 100-seat majority and put Labour in third place in seats behind the Liberal Democrats. What was it they kept saying about Jeremy Corbyn? Any other leader would be 20 points ahead. Well, how about any other leader would be on 20 points? The constant focus on migration is basically the same mistake that Rishi Sunak made to increase the salience of an issue that they kind of know they're going to fail on. They're not going to leave the refugee convention. They're not going to go to a diplomatic war with France, as Maurice Glassman seems to want them to do, over turning the boats back right. They know they're going to fail on the basic thing that the public wants, which is for asylum seekers to just go away and disappear into the ether. And what that's allowed is Reform to capitalise on this endless discussion about migration policy, which tops basically every single political talk show in the country. Although I guess if we stop talking about migration, we'd have to start talking about their disability cuts or their foreign policy, and the public don't like that either. Curtis, this surely makes grim reading for the Labour Party, doesn't it?
Well, thoughts and prayers for James O'Brien when he said that any other leader will be 20 points ahead when Jeremy Corbyn's leader. And you're right, they can't even get 20%. This is utterly embarrassing. I mean, to look at these specific by-election results, in South Glamorgan, which is what the original seat was, I mean, since like 1973, Labour have consistently won over and over again. I think, and then in 1996, it changed to Cardiff, and they consistently won there, bar from 2004 to 2012. That's where the Lib Dems took a minority win in the council. But Labour retook it in 2012, probably due to the coalition. But what we've seen is, I mean, this is kind of central now. Grangetown specifically is a Labour stronghold. They won since, they've been solidly since 2022. But here's the thing: when you look at those results, they've continually lost their support. I mean, in 2022, they had a 12% sort of, they were up on 12% vote share, or 12% more than second place, and it's gone down each year because the Labour vote has been collapsing. It's been a long-term trend since Tony Blair, actually. I think because we're in the era of populism, it's accelerating. But the long-term trends of the Labour Party have been going for a very long time. Now, of course, we had in 2017 under Jeremy Corbyn a sort of spike in support. We all remember that it was a hung parliament and Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote. But having said that, though, a lot of the support was still students, young people, metropolitan areas and cities. But the so-called Labour Heartlands was still being lost. So this has been a long-term trend, and sort of the Jeremy Corbyn project was like a big plaster, you know, on some glass where the water was coming out, and now it's been shattered. Now, of course, the grown-ups in the room would say, but in 2024, Keir Starmer got a historic majority, but we're not stupid. It was less votes than Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 and 2019, and it's because the Conservatives lost the election. It's very interesting, actually, that you say that they keep talking about immigration, and it's a wild strategy, right? Because probably the number one rule in politics is to try and talk about things that you're best at or what you're known favourably for. So for the Labour Party, you want to talk about the bread and butter issues, okay? People have this vague sort of notion, maybe not anymore under Keir Starmer, but this vague idea that the Labour Party is a bit more fair. They stand up for the ordinary person. They're going to be nicer to poorer people and a bit more progressive on social issues, and the Conservative Party a bit more pro-business. That's the sort of general feeling. So why don't they lean into public services, National Health Service, I mean, really strong workers' rights, not sort of dilly-dallying around the edges, instead of doing benefit cuts, instead of obviously, you know, pivoting to the right on immigration. Even when it comes to transgender issues, seemingly Reform or Labour are to the right of Reform, obviously only in terms of rhetoric, I suspect. And this is the problem with the Labour Party Politburo, as you like to say, is that they seem to believe that if you just reach across the aisle, right, and that's it, that's how you're electorally successful. but it doesn't work. I mean, let's think of 2015. 2015, Labour lost that election. And what was the promise? Ed Miliband said, I'm going to offer austerity light. And the Conservatives were offering austerity full fat, right? And the sort of the grown-ups in the room, their analysis was, well, people don't trust Labour on spending given the sort of financial crisis. Now, I would say actually, the Labour could have went full populist and said the 2008 financial crash was happening because of the banks. We stand up for workers and doctors and ordinary people, but they decided to take on the Thatcherite economic sort of paradigm and copy the Conservatives. So people were like, well, we're going to vote for the real thing, which is austerity. And given the fact that David Cameron came across as more competent, then they're not going to vote for the sort of light version. That's the same when it comes to immigration, right? They're not winning anyone over, right? They're going to people and reform voters who hate them, by the way, saying, we're never going to vote for you, but we're going to try and copy your policies. So this sort of pivot to sounding really tough on immigration, even alluding to the Rivers of Blood speech, Enoch Powell, quite disgraceful actually, is not going to convince anyone because people are going to either think, one, I don't trust you. Two, even if I do trust you, why would I vote for you when I know that Nigel Farage and Reform are stronger on immigration? And I think that what this does essentially is reaching across the aisle, but not appealing to your base. Now, of course, compromise is key in an election. You need to appeal to your base and broaden out. It feels like the strategy from the Labour Party will be like Reform saying, we're now really pro-migration because we're trying to reach new voters. Now, of course, that'll be electorally disastrous. I mean, why would Reform do that? They'd sink in the polls, they'd lose their base. But to me, that's kind of the same logic. Whereas actually, the Labour Party should not be doing cutting disability benefits, not keeping the 2-child benefit cap. No, they should be redistributing wealth and power. And as we know, time and time again, is that they're not losing votes to Reform. They're losing votes to the left, to the Liberal Democrats, to the Greens, where the Green Party is kind of like where the Labour Party base is. They want a wealth tax. They want public services in public hands, like renationalisation. They don't want any austerity. And it just feels like, do these people not understand that? Does Morgan McSweeney not understand it? Is he that deluded? Does he not agree with the polls? Or have they almost consigned themselves and think, you know what, we're going to lose the next election? Who cares? Which, by the way, if I was Starmer and I thought I was going to lose the next election, I'd bring in a whole host of radical politics. But of course, Starmer and McSweeney are ideologically opposed to that. So it's I don't think there's going to be any sort of way back for the Labour Party because these deep-seated issues, I think, began with Blair, are not going to be turned around because people have lost trust in Keir Starmer. We've also in today's society, the rules are different. We're in era populism. No one trusts the two main parties. So I think what's going to happen is it's going to be a death of the Labour Party. And for me, it can't come soon enough.
I think it's a really interesting point that you brought up there, Curtis, about the continual decline of the Labour Party, especially in those heartland communities, that was continual apart from 1 year. And that year was 2017, right? I think that was broken apart by the second referendum policy and issues maybe on geopolitics, for example, in 2019, right? But the broader anti-austerity message was powerful in kind of keeping hold of a Labour coalition that was steadily disintegrating up until that point. And I think what people don't really realise is that regional inequality is a really big problem. Regional inequality is huge. And whilst I think that there is definitely a difference in voting patterns between rural and urban seats, which in my mind breaks down across age lines, I think there's a lot of a difference in terms of how old you are is more of a contributing factor to how likely you are to vote right or left wing. And this is borne out by polling, it's borne out by election results. People try and make this into a class issue. And actually, I don't think it necessarily is. I definitely think that the middle class people are more likely to vote kind of Labour or Lib Dem. But the people who are poorer are shown to vote for both Green and for Reform, if you look at the actual results here. And when you look at, for example, the results in 2019 and 2017, Labour still won a plurality amongst working age people. It's the older people in the older constituencies. Like if you look at somewhere in the northeast, you look at somewhere in Cardiff, the inner city seats, they're not exactly rich in terms of the people who live. They don't earn a lot of money in lots of cases, especially in places like Newcastle, left behind areas of the country that have seen the worst of deindustrialization, of the lack of investment coming from the state, which hasn't been overturned, by the way, in anywhere near the amount that it needs to by the Labour government. What was their first thing they were doing was more investment into Oxford and Cambridge, like they need any more of it. And so you've seen these areas of the country continue to be more deprived. But it is the age demographic of the rural seats, which are much older, and the younger seats with high student populations, people have migrated there for service sector jobs, because those things don't really exist in more kind of spread out rural constituencies. If you want to get a job as a young person, you basically have to move to an inner city today because of the lack of industrial work outside of the cities, because it's a service sector economy. And that's led to this kind of disparate voting intention, which is broken down by age. But regionally, you still see moves against Labour, and this is happening across the country. It'll be interesting to see if the current polls stay as they are, or if indeed if a new left-wing party from Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, or led by whoever it might be in 4 years' time, or indeed at the local elections next year, if those warning signs, which clearly aren't being heeded by the Labour Party about where the hemorrhaging votes to progressive voters to their left, will leave them decimated in areas of the country that they thought were former strongholds, because it's a lot of Labour defences next year. We kind of missed how badly Labour are doing in local elections in May because it was mostly Tory defences, right? The big story was Tory losing votes to Reform, Reform of the new kids on the block, let's talk about them. And that's been the story ever since the meteoric rise of Reform. But I think people are going to miss just how devastated Labour are going to be in inner city and metropolitan areas, as you rightly point out, Curtis, come the local election results next year. And maybe we might see a little bit more of a platform for people to the left of Labour rather than this continual concentration on Labour versus Reform, which, to be fair, I don't think it's unreasonable. I think it's worth pointing out that Reform win a lot of their votes from people who didn't vote last time round. Low propensity voters who feel completely disabused by Westminster, who are getting back into voting because of Reform. And that's who Labour are trying to fight for the votes for. Again, I just don't think there is any way that you're going to win them over as an establishment party who, in their minds, already have a history of failing on migration policy, because Blair was the party of mass immigration as far as they're concerned, even though it's kind of higher under, for example, Boris Johnson in 2022. So there's a lot of things going on here, a lot of things at play, but the local elections next year are going to be really, really interesting. Definitely worth sticking around to check out those.